Hey, my wonderful little fourth graders. Welcome back to another edition of The Wild Robots by Peter Brown. I have to tell you, besides, seeing you guys every single day, one of my favorite things is sitting in the jellyfish garden with you guys reading a book. And I know this is not the same, but it's still, I don't know, it's one of those things that makes me feel still connected to you, that we can just kind of sit down, we can listen, we did this enough together that we can kind of imagine that we're all still here. So only one chapter today. It is chapter 63, The Journey. After months of separation, Roz and Brightbill, mother and son, were together again. And they had so much catching up to do. They went into the nest and the robot built a fire. Then the goose gazed into the flames and told the story of the winter. This is what he said. We spent the whole first day of our migration flying over the ocean. It seemed like the ocean would go on forever, but just when the flock was getting tired, Longneck pointed at some tiny islands on the horizon. We flew down to one of the islands and ate dune grass and rested our wings. After a few days of hopping from island to island, we reached the mainland and continued over fields and forests, and then the snow began to fall. I'd never seen snow before, and at first I thought it was beautiful, but it just kept coming. The others explained that the snow was early and that we are never supposed to see it, but there it was, piling up all around us as we tried to sleep at night. Longneck worried that the weakest geese wouldn't survive, and he was right, Mom. We lost old Widefoot on the very first snowstorm. We tried to fly around the snowy weather, but we got completely lost, and the weather became even worse. Lakes and ponds and rivers began freezing. We couldn't find food or water, so we ate snow, and that only made us colder, Mom. We had trouble cleaning ourselves, and our feathers became dirty and heavy. The flock was in real bad shape, but Longneck kept us moving. We are geese, he squawked. We geese keep going. One day, we were struggling through the snow shower when we saw something called a farm. It had perfectly square fields and enormous buildings, and stomping her way through the farm was a robot. She looked just like you, Ma. Longneck sent me over to speak to the robot, but I couldn't understand anything she said, so I just followed her through the farm and around a corner, and then I saw something I never expected. Plants! Bright, colorful plants! I didn't understand how the plants could survive in such cold weather, but then I saw they were actually inside a building. I learned later it was called a greenhouse, and it had clear walls made of something called glass. The robot pressed a button on the wall, and the door slid open, and warm air came rushing out. I hadn't felt warmth in so long that I just had to follow her inside, Ma. It was like summer in there. The air was warm and sweet and sticky, and there were rows and rows and rows of different plants. The robot didn't pay any attention to me, so I wandered around the greenhouse nibbling on leaves and drinking from puddles. Then I heard a scratchy voice behind me. Yes, Nora?
I thought you were a totally different person when you were saying one of the voices. I thought you were listening to a video.
No, making the voices, that's the best part. In case you didn't know, Nora's here.
Hi.
She thought I was watching a video. But nope, I'm just making a fool of myself while I read. It wouldn't be fun if I just said, plants, bright, colorful plants. I didn't understand. That wouldn't make a lot of sense. Do you want to stick in with us, or do you want to go?
Sticking.
Okay. All right. Nora's going to listen too. Ma, it was like summer in there. The air was warm and sweet and sticky, and there were rows and rows and rows of plants. The robot didn't pay any attention to me. You can. If I were younger, I would have killed you by now. I spun around, and there was an old cat. She walked on stiff legs, and her fur was gray and clumpy. The cat's name was Snooks, and she didn't seem very nice. But when she saw the other geese out in the cold with their faces pressed against the glass, she told me how to open the door. You can rest in here. Stay out of sight. The humans aren't as friendly as me. None of us knew what humans were, but we didn't care. We were just happy to be out of the cold. Loudwing was so happy she cried. The flock drank and ate and bathed and slept and stayed out of the way. Snooks showed us where to leave our droppings so they wouldn't be noticed. And for a few days, the greenhouse was our home. Once or twice a day, the robot would go outside and return with a box or a bag, but most of the time, she stayed in and quietly worked on the plants. There was a barn that I just had to explore. It was filled with animals and machines and straw and 2 other robots. Oh, no! Mr. Bill!
Mr. Who?
Oh, it's from an old comic. It was filled with animals and machines and piles of straw and 2 robots. One robot was fixing a broken door when I walked in. She was using a loud spinning tool called a saw. She pushed the saw through a piece of wood and the dust shot into the air. Everything was going smoothly until I saw the saw suddenly lurch forward and slice right through 3 of the robot's fingers. But she was fine. A minute later, there was a whoop sound and she popped on a new hand. Then she went right back to work using the saw again. The other robot worked with the animals. Chickens, sheep, pigs, cows. They were all in cages. The chickens kept asking me how I'd gotten out of my cage. I was explaining that I'd never been in a cage. And then I heard panic sounds coming from the greenhouse. I ran back and found that the human had discovered the flock. We didn't know what he was saying, but he looked really angry. Longneck tried to defend us. He got in front and spread his wings and honked, but the human wasn't afraid. He pulled out a shiny stick and pointed it right at Longneck. Hook hissed, "Look out, he's got a rifle." Suddenly, a bright beam of light shot out of the rifle and Longneck slumped to the floor. He was dead, Ma. The flock was so scared, we fluttered around and honked and knocked over plants. But the human kept moving toward us, pointing his rifle, so I pecked a button to open the door, and we ran outside into the cold and flew away from there as fast as we could, Ma. Without Longneck, the flock needed a new leader. Everyone wanted me to lead. I didn't know what to do, so I just started repeating Longneck's words. I squawked, "We are geese, and geese keep going." Then I took the point, and the flock spread out behind me. The weather had us all turned around, and nobody knew which way to go, so I just led us straight south. We saw more robots and humans and buildings, but we didn't stop. We knew we were way off course when we saw the ocean again, but at least it was a little warmer by the water. So I decided to follow the coastline for a while. There were more buildings by the coast. Most of them were on land, but some were in the water. The ocean buildings were dirty and crumbly and leaning in different directions. There weren't any humans or robots in those buildings, only sea creatures. We saw ships on the water. We saw ships on the land. We even saw ships in the air, Ma. They buzzed through the sky like giant dragonflies. And when we reached a place called a city, there were thousands of buildings and robots and humans and ships, and they were all so close together. When we stopped for a rest on a rooftop, we met a friendly pigeon named Graybeak. She had grown up there, so she knew everything about the city. She flew us over towers and under bridges and kept us away from the buzzing airships. And everywhere we went, we saw robots, Ma. Some of the robots were just like you, but others crawled on 6 legs or rolled on wheels or slid up and down the sides of buildings. Some robots were really small, and some were so big. They moved and cleaned things, and they built things, and they did every kind of job you can think of. Graybeak brought us to the ledge of the side of a building and told us to look through the windows. Inside was a family of humans, and they had a Roz robot. When we looked into other buildings, we saw other humans with other robots. Every human had a robot. I told Graybeak about you, Ma, and she wanted to show one last place. We flew to the edge of the city to a really big building called a factory. Graybeak got us to the roof of the factory, and we looked down at the factory and saw machines building sparkly heads and torsos and limbs. The factory was building robots, Ma. A machine held up a robot torso and put 2 legs under it and then snapped it into place. It put feet under the legs and it snapped them into place. It snapped arms and shoulders and snapped heads into arms. A head was snapped on top and a robot was finished. Ma, the robot just looked just like you. I think that factory is where you were built. I wanted to watch more robots being built, but it started snowing again, so we said goodbye to Graybeak and continued flying south. We saw fewer robots and humans and buildings and ships. The air became warmer and the snow disappeared. We started seeing other flocks of geese in the sky, so we followed them to the middle of a wide grassy field where there were lakes and hundreds of other geese. We had finally reached the wintering grounds. After all we'd been through, our flock had become very close. We kept to ourselves, eating and resting and remembering the geese we had lost, but after a few weeks, we began to mingle with the other flocks. We met geese from all around the world, and they told us about their homes and migrations and the troubles with the wintry weather. Every flock had lost geese on the way. A few flocks didn't make it at all. Before we knew it, the early spring flowers were poking up, and it was time to go home. We followed the usual migration route north. We flew over fields and forests and hills, but we didn't see any signs of humans or robots, and that was fine with us. Eventually, we reached the ocean, and then our island, and then our pond, and then I saw you. That's it. Kind of a longer one, especially with Nora popping in. So about the migration, this little geese has learned so much about the world around and so many things that could not be taught on the island. Happy New Week. Hope you are doing well. Hope you are staying safe. I'll see you tomorrow when we read another chapter. Bye-bye.